I am here with some of my favorite people, Russell Swan, Lori Provencher, Mike Greenwood, my partners in ophthalmology here in the upper Midwest. And we're going to be talking today about iDose. I'm John Berdahl. I'm an ophthalmologist in Sioux Falls. And we're really lucky to be able to kind of be on the front edge of some of these technologies through the years. And with that, let me quick ask Russell to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, John. Russell Swan. I practice out in Montana. Had the pleasure of being a part of the iDose clinical trial, and super excited to talk about this and how it kind of moves our treatment options forward for glaucoma.
Great. Lori Provencher.
Yeah, Lori Provencher, new addition to the Omaha practice for Vance Thompson Vision, and I do cataract and glaucoma care.
Mike Greenwood.
Yep, Mike Greenwood, Fargo, North Dakota, cornea, cataract, refractive, and glaucoma surgeon.
Great. So before we zoom in and talk more about iDose, let's talk about drug delivery in general. So let's start with this. Give me your kind of philosophy on drug delivery. Is it important? Why is it important, especially in glaucoma? But you can even go broader than that outside of glaucoma, ophthalmology, and into broad medicine. Lori, start with you.
Yeah, I think I always like to reference birth control for women. So since I'm the woman on the screen, I will go right there. But I mean, why wouldn't you put something in your body that you don't have to worry about taking every day that is super, super important? So I'm not sure what's more important, avoiding pregnancy or preventing glaucoma progression, but I think both we can all agree are really important. And so the fact that ophthalmology is on board and we have that opportunity now to know that our patients are getting 24-hour sustained drug release is it's hard to measure how valuable that really is just yet. I think it's going to take time to see, but we have a good idea that it's going to be really good for our patients.
All right, Mike, zoom out on drug delivery. What do you think? How important is drug delivery in general? And then in a bit, we'll start zooming into glaucoma in particular.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. And the reason is we don't realize how hard it is for, in this example, patients to take drops all the time. The doctor's got to write the drop. The prescription's got to get to the pharmacy. The patient's got to get to the pharmacy. We've got to make sure they get the prescribed drop and it doesn't get something different. Then they got to remember to take the drop every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, even though that stings and burns or causes irritation. And then we're asking them to do that day after day after day after day. And so even though traditionally, drops have been something considered, safe, quote, air quotes for those that are listening, there's risk in that safety. And, having the drug delivery takes that literally out of the patient's hands and lets the drug work 24/7, 365, just like Lori was talking about.
All right. So Mike Greenwood is the Yogi Bear of Vance Thompson Vision. And when he said there is risk and safety, that is exactly the kind of thing that Mike says all the time, that the first time you hear it, you think, come on, dude. And then after you think about it a little bit more, you're like, hey, he's pretty profound. So thank you, Yogi. Russell, what do you think?
Well, first of all, risk and safety, so true. If there's a little risk with going in the great outdoors in Montana, you might run into a bear or you might see something else. But if you don't get out there, you don't get to enjoy the views. So I'm with the Greenwoodisms of enjoying that, which is super fun. What I would say on, for me, drug delivery, I think in the ophthalmology space where it kind of first I had exposure to it was in the retina world. Historically, we had no treatments for macular degeneration. And then we had these injections that could give people a month of treatment for their AMD. And now there's, extended treatments, whether steroid or anti-VEGF, that sometimes last 2 or 3 months. And I think that that's really, that extension of therapy and improvement in the quality of life and quality of treatment for patients is a huge, huge deal. So for me to see that, now work its way into the glaucoma space is super, super exciting. And, retina doctors are picking on patients every month, and we're talking about something that we get, 2-3+ years of treatment out of, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I'll personalize it kind of like Lori did. I'm on one medication. It's Lipitor. And I just ran out of my 3-month supply 5 days ago. I haven't yet got the refill. I haven't yet gone and get it. It'll be a miracle if I don't have it in another week. And I think that, as patients get older and get on more medications, maybe they get better at the repetition of it, but so much of it also, the data would show that it gets harder to use your eye drops if you've got more. But I'll tell you what, I'm bad at it. And so if there's a way to do something that's more convenient so that I'm going to get what I'm supposed to get, I think that would be helpful. So iDose is not the first drug delivery in glaucoma. I think it's the third drug delivery in glaucoma. I think, wasn't there a pilocarpine injection underneath the conjunctiva prior to all of us? Or maybe it's
wasn't there a bimatoprost ring
Ring.
at some
Yeah.
point?
yeah, but that never got FDA
That never
approved.
got, okay.
I had that in my own eye for a week. So I was on the advisory board for that company, which really means you're a guinea pig. And so I wore that thing for a week without the drug in it. And it was actually pretty comfortable. You could see a little white spot in the corner of your eye. The first day it was weird. After that, it got better, but it was never FDA approved. But I think that there was pilocarpine in like a pellet that went in the conjunctiva decades ago before us. Is that true?
Probably.
I'm not sure.
Probably.
I'm not
you're
sure,
the,
but I wouldn't.
You're the senior member of this panel, John. So I think we're gonna have to rely on you for that, my friend.
John, what is pilocarpine?
Yeah, no kidding.
Just kidding.
No kidding. I had a doctor one time from Sioux Falls. I was given a drug talk for Lumagan or something in Sioux Falls, and he came up to me and said, when I had a glaucoma patient, I told him to get a dog. And I'm like, that is so mean. Why would he said, no. I said, get a dog, and we're putting you on carbachol. It's 4 times a day. And you need to feed your dog every time you take your eye drop so that your dog gets accustomed to eating 4 times a day, and they will remind you to come and take your drug 4 times a day. This was before, apps and reminders and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so I think that there was like Pilocert or like relatively similar to Lacrocert, but I could be wrong. But for sure, Durista has been around. What has your guys' experience been with Durista? Somebody tell me what it is. Russell, tell me what it is. Tell me about your experience with it.
Yeah, so Durista is an intracamerally injected biodegradable prostaglandin implant that slowly degrades over time. And, in the clinical trial, and the thought was that it was probably, a 3-month treatment effort or a treatment effect. The data showed that there was maybe some longer term remodeling of the trabecular meshwork or otherwise, where we saw some extended effect for other patients beyond that. I think in general, for me anyway, as I think of it as a stepping stone towards iDose, which we're talking about now, is nice. But again, even coming in every 3 months or every 6 months for an injectable procedure, to me didn't have quite the same value add looking at like a 2 to 3 year implant. So I think a step in a positive direction, useful as an adjuvant therapy in some situations, but for me, not quite as big a game changer.
Did you use it a lot?
Not significantly, no.
Oh, yeah.
Because I felt, sometimes would consider it like as an adjuvant as we're doing SLT for a patient, and maybe we're trying to keep them off drops. So start with that, add SLT in, but it was didn't have a major impact on my personal practice patterns.
Lori?
I would say I use it a moderate amount. I really like it. It's just one of the many cards I play in trying to control patients without medications. And I think it's a nice way to introduce patients to the concept of interventional glaucoma, just like SLT is. It's, hey, we have this option, it's procedural. Let's show you what it's like to not have to take medications and to let the doctor take control. And I think patients typically love it. They're always surprised, in my experience, at how easy it is. And like Russell said, it's not a long-term solution, and you have to reconsider if you're going to go off label and do multiple injections. But I think there was a lot of concern, at least by AbbVie, that iDose could replace Durista. But in my conversations with patients, I'm finding that it's actually just elevating this option of drug delivery as a whole, that, we can do this 6 month to 1 year implant because we're seeing it last a little bit longer than, like Russell said, we were expecting, or we can go ahead and do a procedurally more surgically placed drug implant that lasts longer. And so it just is kind of working together to change the conversation for patients.
I think that's the natural tendency, right? When you're creating a new category, the most important thing is to create the category well, and a rising tide lifts all boats in that moment. And then pretty soon the boats turn on each other and they start firing at each other, and then it becomes competitive. And especially as the market gets more saturated, and we see that more in the MIG space. But right now, I think it's about category creation. Mike, did you use a little, none of Durista?
Of the choices you gave, I'd pick a lot. We were pretty moderate level users of it, and still are. And one of the nice places where it fits for me is sort of that first add back, or that next level of a patient that needs more care. So if they've had, cataract and MIGS in the past, but glaucoma keeps, fighting, and we need to add a medication on, it's sort of our first add back. So it keeps that patient off of taking medications. And one of the beautiful things about these is, again, it's working. The bummer is the medication that it sort of is displacing with the prostaglandin analogs is those are usually once a day, so they're easier for patients to take versus some of the multiple times per day medications that they still have to take. So it'd be a little bit easier to use if our other drops were, mixed around a little bit, if that makes sense.
It didn't, but I think that what you're saying is your easiest to use drug is now the one that we're putting inside the eye, and it would be nice.
I have a comment on that.
Tolerated ones, yeah, Lori.
And this won't surprise you. So we do know that a once a day drop has better adherence and persistence. However, prostaglandins on the surface, I think, can be worse than some of our other options when it comes to topicals. And it's hard on the meibomian glands, and I would rather keep my meibomian glands than lose them for sure, because that's, it's different than, say, evaporative dry eye or some inflammatory dry eye that's easier to treat once the meibomian glands are gone. That's a difficult situation. And also prostaglandins, I've mentioned this before on this podcast, have a lot of cosmetic and periocular side effects that I wouldn't personally want either. And so I'm glad, and they also can be more powerful at lowering intraocular pressure. So I think I agree with you, Mike. I wish we had all the classes available in a sustained system, and I think we hopefully will eventually. But if I did have to pick one, I would still pick a PGA as that option to implant.
That's pretty typical VTV, where we say we agree while we're disagreeing with people just to make them feel better. So that's really Midwest nice, Lori.
Very Midwest nice right there.
Do you have any Yogi Bearisms to come back at her with?
Not at this moment, but
yeah, all right, sounds good. So I used a fair amount of Durista, way more than I thought that I would have. And I was surprised by how much patients like to break, even though they were only going to get it for 4 to 6 months. So, here's kind of the overview of the data. It's labeled, I believe, for 4 months. The Durista is labeled for 4 months. It would be off label to do additional injections, although we have and others have. Oftentimes they're not reimbursed. Sometimes they are. Reimbursement and labeling don't always go hand in hand. But I was surprised by how much we used and how much patients liked it. 70% of the time with Durista, they still have efficacy at 6 months. So now let's move into the iDose. 70% of the time, at least from the phase 2, which a number of us were in, and we're anxiously awaiting the phase 3 data on this, 70% had persistence at 3 years. So, in my mind, I think of it as 6 times longer. So it either lasts 6 months or 3 years. And so that's kind of 6.5 years, if you will, 3 years is. So that's how I think. Yeah. Former math teacher.
I can tell.
Yeah. Former math teacher. I love fractions. They're great. Anyway, speaking of fractions, one of the things that wasn't mentioned on why we love drug delivery is because the drug is getting just to where we want it and not where we don't. So you only have to put, drum roll, a fraction of the drop inside the eye to get at least as good and maybe even a better effect. And we saw that with the iDose and the data that actually iDose gets a little bit better effect than a prostaglandin on the surface does. But it does it without all of the side effects that Lori was talking about, periorbital atrophy and dryness and loss of meibomian glands, all those kind of things. So So let's transition to iDose. Somebody give me an overview of the product. How about Mike? Chance to redeem yourself.
Yeah. So sustained release prostaglandin analog, like we were talking about before, different medication than the Durista. Durista is bimatoprost. This iDose is travoprost. And it's basically a little miniature vial that is implanted inside the eye, anchored to the inside of the eye. So the Durista is kind of free floating. The iDose is fixed, and then it slowly eludes the teeniest fraction of medication over the course of a time. And as John said, you know, it doesn't really have any of the side effects, high satisfaction, low side effect profile of this, and lasts for a very long time. And you know, a number of us were in the clinical trials, like you said, and placing the device is relatively straightforward. You know, you gotta have a good view and make sure that it's anchored correctly. But after that, it sort of does its own thing.
How long's the use for on the label? I'm pretty sure the primary efficacy endpoint was at 3 months, and that's how the label was, and then work for a label extension over time. It's also not labeled for exchange yet, but we were in some of those clinical trials as well, and I believe that's public information that, you know, we'll be working for an exchange. And of course, the concern with an exchange, or the concern with additional Durista, is endothelial cell loss, which I'm fond of saying endothelial cells are replaceable, ganglion cells are not. And I replace endothelial cells a lot with DMEC. That said, I don't want to cause any damage to endothelial cells that we don't need. But we were in the exchange trial as well. But in my mind, I'm pretty convinced that this is going to last out to, you know, 3 years, or 3 years for a majority of our patients. Any of you guys feel like that's not the case based on your read on the data?
No, yeah, the data looks really solid, and you know, anecdotally, the patients that were enrolled in the trial with us did great and had high level of satisfaction of, you know, again, not having to worry about filling their medications, taking the drops, all those things that we mentioned. We're really impressed.
Let's talk about efficacy real quick. Anybody want to discuss the efficacy from iDose?
I'll take a stab at that. So, you know, I think as we talked about, we were part of the FDA trial, and the efficacy data in terms of, you know, effect, as you mentioned, you know, 90+% of people at a year, gradually tapering down to 70% at 3 years. I think the thing that really stood out to me in the efficacy data that's been presented is, you know, when they took patients who were preoperatively or pre-iDose just on a prostaglandin, their average IOP was 18. And as a part of these FDA trials, we always have them washed out of their prostaglandin therapy. Their pressures went up to 23.8. But then very importantly, when we put an iDose in, their pressures dropped to 16.7. So, you know, we had a 1.3 millimeter mercury lowering of their average IOP between just a topical prostaglandin and a intracameral administration of a prostaglandin. And for me, that's one of the biggest data points. I think, you know, the hope would be with drug delivery that you have equivalence of treatment effect. And I think, to Lori's point earlier, like, drug delivery in my mind in this space, it is superior. We have better effect. We know a 1 millimeter drop in mercury is a 10% reduction in glaucoma progression. We have the loss of all of the side effects of topical medication, and we know we have 24-hour therapy. So I truly think of it as a, you know, a similar, yes, it's a similar medication class, but it's a superior therapy to what we currently have, which is the part that's very exciting to me.
And 100% compliance, because 100% of the time you put it in, you know it's in.
Absolutely.
Versus the however frequently they
the John Burdalls who aren't taking their medications.
Yeah, that's right. And my cholesterol is going to enjoy a little bump here for a while. Russell, seems like you know you knew the numbers pretty well. It lowered IOP how much?
You know, I don't have that number right in front of me. I mean, it was very similar to, you know, the control arm was timolol, and it was a very similar control to that.
Yeah, it was
like effectively one drop.
Yeah, no statistical difference with timolol, but numerically superior. And I think that it was about 8 millimeters of mercury, ballpark, something like that, which is a pretty impressive response from a drop. If my memory serves me right, it was 8.0. But
yeah, it's 24 to 16 or roughly, and all comers, I think it was right around that 8. So
yeah, 7.1. I have it here in front of me.
Okay, great job.
And that's a 1.3 better than a topical.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's talk about patients. Lori, who are you going to use this on?
I think that's something I'm still sorting out. I think the no-brainer type case is a patient who comes in who is really, I mean, looking back at their data, they could be well controlled on a PGA. So, PGA is working well for them, but you want to take them off of that PGA for one reason or another. That would be like your typical go-to case. Or if you're intervening with cataract surgery, instead of wondering if a stent or a goniotomy will get them off that med, for sure that the iDose should be able to get them off that med. So I like kind of knowing that for sure situation.
Interesting.
You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're
Yeah.
saying. I haven't heard
Yeah.
it framed that way because I was going to come and challenge you. I'm still going to challenge you. I just think that you might be up for the challenge. So somebody comes in, they're on a prostaglandin, their pressure's 23, they're going to have cataract surgery. Are you doing iDose or are you doing a stent or some sort of, they got mild to moderate glaucoma. So you're doing cataract surgery plus something. What are you doing?
Yeah, I think it
you
comes
know that
down
their
to,
pressure was 29 before they were on the prostaglandin. So the prostaglandin's helping.
right. And if you're happy with that pressure, then I think it's a very safe call to switch to an iDose in that situation. And you might get 1.3 on average
it's
lowering.
safe to do it, but is that what you would do?
I think generally I'm not happy with a low 20s pressure. Okay, you've got me there.
Okay, new scenario. Patient was originally 25. They're put on a prostaglandin. They're down to 18. They've got a cataract. They're stable since they were on the prostaglandin. You're doing cataract surgery on them plus something, of course. What's that plus one in this case?
This is exactly what I was talking about. So if you put in an iDose, you know that you're going to at least get that pressure reduction, maybe more. If you do an iStent or if you do a hydrus or a goniotomy, MIGs are always a little unknown. You don't know if that's going to do the trick for them. So I think having a known thing is really, really nice.
Yeah. So you're saying, hey, I know that prostaglandins work for this patient. I know the mechanism of action works for this patient. So why go to a different one? My soft counterpoint would be, yeah, but you also know that it's probably only going to last for 3 years, where a stent may last longer.
There's not a whole lot of
why
data
not plus plus
to support that.
Why not plus plus?
Oh, Russell's going with both. I'll come to you in a second. But our data, that we published up to, I think, 7 or 8 years shows that the IOPs stayed at about 16 with an iStent, in our broad cohort, down from 19 on treatment down to 16, cut medications in half. And at about 7 years, the medications were back to baseline at about 7 years. Our 10-year data shows that too. We just haven't published it yet. But the medications did creep back.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's, for me, that's the debate in my mind. And I hadn't heard it framed like, hey, the prostaglandin works, so why not do the prostaglandin? I had been leaning heavier into, well, trabecular bypass has a shot at working for a longer period of time. So if I had to choose one, and I think I still would probably choose trabecular bypass, but Russell's only vice is gluttony. So tell us why you want to maybe do both, Russell.
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things I always think about with any patient is like, what would I do if it was my own eye or as a family member of mine? And without a doubt, if it was my own eye and I had mild, and I was either of those patients that you just described, I would want both. Now, there's reimbursement things, there's other things, but if you were to take all those things aside, if you were to take reimbursement, if you were to take labeling, if you were to take those things off the side and say, what would I want done with my eye? I would want trabecular meshwork stenting, and I would want sustained release drug delivery.
All right.
And I would save all those ganglion cells.
I love it. I love it. All right, Yogi, break the tie. You will determine the standard of care at VTV for these patients, depending on who you agree with.
Well, I would go, I will choose both. Because that option's on the table. Both the stents and the iDose. Not
both Lori and I?
Both Lori
both
and
answers.
But the thing I like about it is you can do both, and you don't have to do them both at the same time. You could do, cataract plus goniotomy, stent, your MIGS of choice in the angle, And then when you need to, iDose is there to pick up the slack. And in Lori's case, you can do it vice versa. So I think we're all right. I'm right on right.
Classic VTV. We totally disagree, but we're all right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's a good point, Mike. And one point that you make is that iDose can be used standalone or in combination with cataract surgery. There are some standalone indications for stents, but they're a little bit more restricted. And so, then perhaps you don't want to box yourself out of, maybe doing a stent or something like that in the future. That said, the ability to do goniotomy is pretty broad in those patients. So you could do that too. Okay. Great. So let's talk about price. This thing's expensive. How much does it cost, Mike?
14,000 to us, $14,000, which would translate roughly to the same for a patient.
Yeah. So it's about $14,000 just for the iDose, and then having surgery, on top of that. This is done in the operating room. None of you guys are going to do it in your office, are you? I don't think
Negative.
that you can see good enough to do it. Maybe office-based surgical suite would be okay, but I think the patient needs to lie down and you need to have a gonio mirror, and it is a delicate procedure, but a doable procedure. So, let's be real candid here. $14K. How do you feel about that, Russell?
Yeah, I mean,
you feel great because you were just doing a whole bunch of stuff anyway. So.
I mean, I think it is significant. And I think that that's where, the burden of us as providers is to say, like, do I personally feel like there's value in a 3-year therapeutic that's provides 100% compliance, increased efficacy, and decreased side effects? Absolutely. And is there going to be a burden on all of us and all providers who are putting in to advocate for our patients with insurers to get it covered? Absolutely. But I think, again, the value when you consider 3 years of treatment that's superior with less side effects, with 100% compliance, I think the value proposition I think it's in alignment with the value proposition, and hopefully also continues to drive further innovation in the space.
Lori, too expensive, too cheap, about right?
I think there is some initial sticker shock with it, but what I try to keep in mind is it is a first of its kind 3-year pharmaceutical, and it has a lot of potential to overall reduce office visits and FTEs and future intervention. And so just trying to put it into context that way makes it feel a little bit better.
A little bit better is a little bit better, about right?
A little bit better.
Okay, sounds good.
Glaucoma is a blinding disease,
Yeah.
So like, I think that, again, to the point of like, hey, if this was decreasing the risk of cataract progression, like a 3-year drug delivery that decreased the risk of cataract progression, which is a reversible process, to me, that's very different than something that is treating a irreversibly damaging disease.
Yeah, fair. Mike?
Oh, I know. Math teacher Berdal.
Yeah.
So if we did just the rough math on topicals, say we're doing branded topicals, they're on a PGA. So say they're on taflupras, to be fair, right? And they're on alpha-GAN-P or something like that. Over the course of 3 years, how much was that going to cost a patient? Back of the napkin.
Yeah, back of the napkin, it's about $4,800 a year. Say
Right.
$400 a year for a branded drug. So round that to 5,000, multiply that by 3 years, and you got about 15K. So you're coming in right there. Another, I think, fair price point would be Durista at, I think it's around $2,500. You multiply that. So that's about 5,000 a year. You multiply that by 3 years at about 15K. If you look in the drug delivery world for retina, some of the drug deliveries for retina, and even if they're just a steroid, are more expensive or comparable. So the market analysis would say that it's competitive in pricing. I think that Russell's point is real. This is authentic innovation. So is Durista. I mean, so many of our innovations are really incremental, but those two are real innovations. And here's my take on it. And I've lived this a little bit intimately with trying to take some companies and get investment for them and take a brilliant idea, or at least an idea, and bring it into reality is that, man, it's hard and it's expensive, and it has to be, one of the better returns on investment. Otherwise, investors aren't going to get there, and the hurdles are significant, and the binary risk, meaning the risk of death of the investment all the way to zero, is high. And in order, to get these new innovations to the marketplace, people have to be really willing to take that risk. So when I think about it in the arc of innovation. So it's expensive now. Over time, these things come down. Especially, you look at generic medications, because if we did the comparison to a generic medication, it would have been way more expensive than that, right? So I don't know if, go back to my Lipitor, I don't know if my Lipitor would have been worth $300 a month 30 years ago or whenever it came out into the marketplace, but it sure is worth the $3 a month now, and I still don't take it very well. But it sure is worth the $3 a month now. And I think that we as doctors are in this uncomfortable place where we're advocating for the patient in front of us. We don't want it to be expensive for them. We just want them to have access. We're advocating for the system, and we know the system is burdened, and we don't want the cost to the system to be too much either. We have to run our practices, and all that has to work. But we also, if not us, who's going to be responsible for the future of medicine and making sure that there are technologies there in the future that are better than the ones we have now, and they're less expensive, like a generic prostaglandin. And so this is the awkward adolescent period of getting technologies to be broadly used. And so we put all of that stuff, looking the patient in the eye, our oath to them, our responsibility to the medicine, the citizenship, and to future patients. And we put that into a jumble, and we try to do what's right for the patient that's sitting there in front of us, and the profession that we love, and our citizenry. So with that preachy ending, I'll give everybody one last comment to make about whatever you want. It can be iDose or anything. I'm going to end with Yogi Berra and a really high expectation for something folksy brilliant. Russell.
Mine's not going to be folksy brilliant, but just related to iDose. I think the thing that I would want people to walk away is that I do think it is a superior treatment to our topical therapies for the things listed. It's not an equivalent therapy that lasts for 3 years. It's a superior treatment. And I think it's something that I'm very excited about to have available to providers now.
Lori.
I think Russell said it earlier, but I'll say it again. I think keeping in mind what you would want for your own eyes, or perhaps your family members' eyes, if they were undergoing glaucoma treatment, is really important in every step you take in their journey.
All right, Yogi, folksy brilliant, pressure's on.
Yeah, two quick things. We'll end with that one. But I had the opportunity to tour the iDose facility where they put all this stuff together, and it's a highly manual process with a lot of different people that have to touch it to make it happen. And as a little teaser, if you tune in, I believe it is June 24th, we're doing an iDose live webinar before John does live iDose surgery and operation with glaukos. Teaser, if you want to know the full history of the iDose through the FDA journey, tune into that, because it is actually very fascinating. With that, the Yogi Berraism of this is, if you make something easy to do, it's easy to do. And if you put a medication inside a patient's eye with sustained release delivery, and they don't have to worry about taking it, all of a sudden it became very easy for them to take their medication.
Yogi, you delivered. Thanks
Love
everybody
it.
for joining us. Appreciate your time, and have a great day.